Bonnie was born on a Klamath Indian Reservation in southern Oregon, just a few miles from the rim of Crater Lake, on April Fool's Day. Her father, Bill, was a forester for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where he managed the Indian timberlands, a job that would move the family all over the U.S. every few years.
They move you around like the military, so after a couple years there, we moved to North Dakota where there wasn't a tree in sight. We actually lived at Standing Rock Indian Reservation. I remember there was always a war between North and South Dakota over Sitting Bull's body, so my dad would have to take turns with the other men going out and guarding Sitting Bull's grave from time to time, and every once in a while the other side would get through and dig it up and take him back to the other state, and then after a while they'd take him back to the first place. So that was kind of interesting.
From North Dakota, and with Sitting Bull's remains now in South Dakota, we think that's a story for another time. Bonnie's family moved to an Apache Indian reservation on the New Mexico-Colorado border. That's where Bonnie started school in a tiny 2-room schoolhouse straight out of the American frontier.
Every road was a different grade, and I remember we had a brother and sister that rode a horse to school and tied it up outside every day while we were in class, and had a big old pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room, just like you see in the old-timey movies. From there we went to Colorado, where my dad worked in a logging camp for a year, and then finally back to Oregon when he got a job as the city forester in Portland. So after that, that's mainly where I grew up until I went off to college.
Young Bonnie's fascination with how things work paired well with her love for music. She was a member of the school's orchestra, having either learned or taught herself to play any number of instruments, including the viola, the cello, the guitar, and more recently, the harp and the Irish barron drum. The exuberance Bonnie had for music spilled over into the classroom, and her inquisitive nature led her to some interesting places.
I've always been really curious about how things work, and I remember when I was in elementary school, I got an interest in eyeballs and wanting to know what was inside an eyeball, and had gone to our local butcher shop and asked if he could get me some cow eyeballs. When they came in, the butcher wasn't there, and the manager was wondering what on earth are these eyeballs here for, and was asking everybody about a high school girl that was looking for eyeballs, and was surprised to find out it was somebody from the elementary school. But I did that and won a prize in the science fair. I've just always been real interested in how things work and taking things apart.
Bonnie set out for college in the mid-1960s with her hopes set for Radcliffe, but opted to stay local at the University of Oregon. Bonnie's become a staple in the transportation industry over the last 52 years, but that destiny was not written in the stars.
I always wanted to be an astronomer when I was young, so I got an undergraduate degree in math and physics. Then I decided that I wanted to do something a little more practical, and I followed one of my professors or somebody that had been ahead of me and gone over to engineering, so I switched over to industrial engineering and got a master's degree in industrial engineering from Oklahoma. My mom was always real big kind of on the women's lib stuff, you know, and opportunities for women, and I guess I kind of just took it for granted. I haven't tried to be a pioneer, you know, maybe I'm an example. My uncle was an Air Force officer, and he got me into Civil Air Patrol, which is kind of like Scouts, but it's an auxiliary of the United States Air Force, and you wear Air Force uniforms and go to summer camp on air bases. They had had a flying encampment program for several years, but the first year they decided to let girls go. I actually got a call on a Friday afternoon and said if I could take the FAA written exam on Monday and pass it, I could be Oregon's representative to the flying encampment. So I holed up over the weekend and studied and took the exam and passed, and there were only 5 girls that year, and they decided to put us all together in Lawton, Oklahoma. That was one of 3 different sites. We spent that summer, we were here for a whole month, all day long, flying, all at the expense of the Air Force, and got our pilot's licenses at the end of the month. The next summer I went to another Civil Air Patrol flying encampment in Reno, Nevada, and got my glider pilot license. And after all that, I finally bought a car. Didn't know how to drive and had to have someone drive it home from the lot for me. So I got my pilot's license before I ever sat behind the wheel of a car.
Bonnie eventually settled in Oklahoma, where she had met an architecture student from Pakistan named Sadiq, and the couple got married. At the time, the US Postal Service had recently opened its National Center for Employee Development in Norman, Oklahoma. The Industrial Engineering Department at the University of Oklahoma had been doing some work with USPS, so upon graduation, Bonnie was able to transition right over. She first walked into that building as an employee in 1972, and it would be the only employer she ever knew for the next 39 years.
At that time, the Postal Service was just starting to automate a lot of the mail processing, and the Postal Service normally hires from within, so rather than looking for a workforce outside, they were looking to build a maintenance workforce. My job was to find out what kind of skills people need to be maintenance mechanics and electricians, and then to develop training programs. And we actually had fun for about a year and a half just getting to look at all these different electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic trainers, buy them and take the lessons and decide what the Postal Service should buy. They actually set up postal employee development learning centers in all the major post offices where people could come in for the training. And as part of that project, I asked my boss if I could sit in on one of the classes and see what the technicians were like and what their skills were, so that I'd have a better idea what we were shooting for the training. And he told me he thought I should just take the class and I'd really find out what it was like. And so I did. It was a bulk conveyor class. I don't know if you've ever been inside a big post office, but a big major post office is just like an automotive assembly plant inside. In some cases, it's 3 or 4 stories high without any floors, just all open and conveyors and all kind of equipment running around. So that's where I started out. After I took that class, I was invited to come back and teach it, and just got involved in teaching and been doing it ever since.
It didn't take long for Bonnie to build a reputation as a prolific teacher and the type of manager that simply wanted to see her people develop into the best possible version of themselves.
Bonnie and I worked together at the Postal Training Center in Norman. She inherited our work group, the heavy duty truck group, and she became my manager. So that's where I know her very well. One thing about Bonnie is that when you mentioned the word leadership, it really describes her quite a bit on her leadership style. She's an encourager, and she's always working with you to make you better. She basically allowed me to participate in TMC for years and years, and other SAE and all these other events that we took part of. But she also let other staff members pick their places they wanted to do extra work. So that's what she allowed us and encouraged us to be active in other organizations.
Bonnie's hands-on approach to her work helped her climb the classroom ranks, and it would eventually see her placed in charge of the training of USPS maintenance professionals that service a truck count in the U.S. roughly the size of package rivals FedEx and UPS combined.
I moved from that program over to one of the mail processing equipment classes. They actually have a machine called a facer canceller. If you think of mail going into a mailbox, it's just all dumped in every which way. And when you get it to the post office, you have to sort it out and get it all facing the same way and then run it through a machine to cancel the stamps. It was interesting because when I worked on that bulk conveyor stuff, it was all really giant size motors and things almost as big as diesel engines. And we had tow chains under the floor to pull carts around that weighed 50 pounds a running foot. So all these really big things and big gears. Then I went over to this other machine, and they happened to be doing mechanical when I was there and had the machine taken apart. And I thought, oh my God, how am I all going to learn these little teeny weeny parts? Because I was used to all these things that were so big. And I used to go in at night after class and just take the machine apart by myself and put it back together just to learn how to do it so I could do it with the students. We had really large classes. We had classes of 28 at a time, and then they broke them down into groups of 7. So there were just me and 7 students going through learning the electronics, learning all the mechanical stuff. How do you take it apart, put it back together, and do the adjustments? From there, I actually moved up into some electronic controls on the machines. And about that time is when the Postal Service experimented with electronic mail, and I got a job with that, and that involved telecommunications and having to learn a whole bunch of different skills. So you just kind of progression from mechanical to electrical to electronics and then into the telecommunications. Finally, there was a branch manager job open, and that was the next step up for me. I bid on it. It was actually for the delivery vehicle branch, and being young and naive, I thought, well, if I get it, they'll give it to one of the guys and move me over into their mail processing job, but it didn't work that way. I got it, and I was it, so then I had to learn about trucks.
Just as Bonnie was getting her arms around running the USPS maintenance training program, looming budget cuts threatened to shake things up considerably.
Like any company, when they're always wanting to cut, training's always the first thing to go. And then in the Postal Service, it was vehicles. Some higher management had made a decision that they were not only going to decentralize the vehicle training, but they actually wanted to decentralize the maintenance and contract it all out. To me, that just didn't seem like a smart thing to do. We had over 220,000 trucks and over 200 garages and a lot of people employed, and the mail depends on the trucks. I always say if the trucks aren't moving, the mail's not moving, regardless of what you have to process it with. So I actually became an advocate for keeping not only the training but the vehicle maintenance in the Postal Service. I had to work my way up first to convince my boss and then convince his boss, and I spent about a year and a half going back and forth to Washington, D.C. I'd get on a plane in the morning and go up to Washington with my deck of slides in my purse and do my thing and come back to Oklahoma in the evening, no suitcase, no toothbrush or anything. And I had to start with a couple levels in the training management and then work up to the Deputy Postmaster General and the Postmaster General. And along the way, I remember the Deputy Postmaster General, he asked me, if we have to have maintenance, why can't we just drive the trucks down to the corner service station and get them fixed? And, well, it doesn't work that way. They don't work on big trucks. One of the things I got hit with right when I started, the city of Los Angeles had contracted out all their municipal fleet. And somebody said, well, Los Angeles is doing this, why should the Postal Service have fleet maintenance? And I did a lot of research on that and found out the contractor that got the Los Angeles contractor after 9 months came back to the city and said, we can't do this, we want out of the contract. And the city had to take it back. So it's not easy, especially for a large fleet. So I was finally able to convince the Postmaster General that we need to have training. So after all that, I was finally able to get approval to keep training and then start looking at, how we were going to do it and where we were going to go from there.
The Postal Service handles all its own maintenance in-house, from trucks to general equipment and just about everything. And Bonnie was responsible for all aspects of maintenance training.
I actually had more than just the vehicles under my branch. Actually, I had a safe cracking class under me too that was part of the vehicle group. Every post office has a safe and vault, and you need maintenance on them. So that class was controlled by the inspection service. Not everybody could go to it, and the students didn't even get to keep their maintenance manuals. The inspectors kept them, and they had to check them out when they needed them. But I think when I went over into the vehicles, I was just really interested in that, and I kind of put all my focus there and let my supervisors kind of do the day-to-day stuff on that.
By the mid-1980s, the population of Norman, Oklahoma was just less than about 80,000. For comparison, during this same time, the population in New Orleans was about 500,000. So Norman is still a comparatively small city. But it was the national HQ for USPS maintenance training, and Bonnie was at the helm, and her influence and footprint was going global.
We do all the training for the whole United States, and we do training for other companies' postal services too. We've had students from Australia and China, Russia, all over. And actually we did training for the military too, for the Navy. All the Navy ships used to have vending machines on them for sailors to buy stamps and do their mail, and it's part of the military mail program. We even had students from Guantanamo. We would have students flying in from all over, and it used to be interesting to hear how they'd get to Norman or what it took them to get home from after the class.
Bonnie serves as chairman of the Oklahoma Trucking Association's Technology Maintenance Council. She was one of the first volunteers to chair the TMC Professional Technician Development Committee, created in 2005, which runs the National Technician Skills Competition. She received TMC's Silver Spark Plug in 2013 and is a recipient of the TMC Study Group Leadership Award. Bonnie was also the USPS nominee for the Federal Government Women in Science and Engineering Award. Bonnie received TMC's Uncle Darrell Hicks Mentor Award in 2018.
She is a quiet force of nature, and everything she does has a touch of excellence on it. So I've known her in that regard for many years, and there is no Technology Maintenance Council without Bonnie in my mind. So here in Oklahoma specifically, Bonnie is the driving force behind both training, meaning workshops that are created and executed here on a state level, and then also the competitions, which of course leads to the national competitions. She shares her immense background both with the current maintenance professionals and then also with the students. And in Oklahoma, like a lot of states, it's our career tech system. And so she has a straddled position, if you will, between providing those workshops for both the ongoing professional technician that's in the shop every day, but also really invest on those up and coming students. Human nature is you gravitate away from things that are unpleasant and you go to those sort of things that's your passion. There's no other explanation I can think of except Bonnie has such a passion for the industry, for technology maintenance, for what she does, and she's happy to pass that on. It's just incredible, and I believe there's only one reason she does it, and that's because she loves it.
Music and transportation aren't Bonnie's only passions. She works with the Special Olympics and volunteers at a local homeless shelter every Tuesday morning where she helps cook and go shopping. Bonnie's also a runner in the Oklahoma Memorial Marathon, an annual race that honors the 168 people killed in the 1995 Alfred P. Murrah Federal Center bombing. She's also active in the Boy Scouts. She's a certified merit badge counselor for truck transportation. The badge requirements involve learning about trucking's role in the economy, visiting a trucking company, gathering information, and making a decision on a sample shipment in addition to interviewing a driver and technician to learn about careers in trucking. But when you take a step back and you look at all the things that Bonnie enjoys, you're going to see a common theme: her ongoing love for the USPS.
I've always been a stamp collector, but had not done it very scientifically or actively, and I have pen pals all over the world. I have over 40 pen pals. I guess I like doing things that have to do with mail because it supports the post office. I just have a million interests. I'm always going every which direction, but I just like to be busy.
Just a song before I go, a lesson to be learned.
Are you familiar with Crosby, Stills and Nash? Yeah, they're my favorite group, and they have one line in one of their songs that flying faster than the speed of sound, it's easy to get burned. That's me.
Traveling twice the speed of sound, it's easy to get burned.